I had just poured myself a cup of tea when it happened. Earl Grey. Still hot. The steam curled upward like a warning I didn't know how to read. It was Sunday afternoon, quiet the way I like it. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the low rustle of autumn leaves scraping across the back patio. My daughter and her husband had stepped outside to take a call, something about a work crisis or a contractor delay. I hadn't really listened. She left her phone on the kitchen counter, face up, unlocked, just sitting there beside the sugar jar like it belonged to me. I didn't mean to touch it, but it buzzed once, lit up, and began playing automatically. A voicemail, his name on the screen. I shouldn't have listened. I know that. But the audio had already begun the phone just inches from my hand, and by the time I realized what I was hearing, it was too late. Too much had already been said. Voicemail, timestamp, 2:43 p.m. Sunday, caller, Marissa Jameson, recipient, Daniel Jameson, husband. Hey babe, so, I talked to her again this morning, same story. She's still hesitant about moving, keeps saying she's not ready to leave the house. Honestly, I think she's just scared, or stubborn, or both. But don't worry, I'll get her there. I'm playing the long game, remember? She trusts me. Still thinks I actually care about those Sunday dinners. Anyway, once the paperwork's signed and she's out, we can finally list it. That house is worth at least $800K now, maybe more with the market. Just be patient. She's old, not stupid. We have to make it feel like it's her idea. Love you. I don't remember setting the teacup down, but I must have. Because a few seconds later, I looked down and saw a puddle of tea seeping into the table runner, the fabric darkening in slow circles, like a wound spreading. My hand was shaking. My chest tight, like someone had looped a belt around my ribs and yanked it hard. She called me old. She said she was playing the long game. She said I still thought she cared. My daughter. The same girl who once wept into my blouse the night she got her heart broken in college. The same girl who used to leave sticky notes on my bathroom mirror that read, "Love you, Mom," in bubble letters. The same girl who had leaned on me after her miscarriage, who I held like a child when she was 35, and felt like her body had betrayed her. I had believed in all of it. I sat there for a moment longer, phone screen, now dark silence swallowing everything. The taste of betrayal is strange. It's not sharp, not right away. It's slow, metallic, like blood rising behind your teeth. They came back inside a few minutes later laughing about something. Her hair caught the sun as she stepped into the kitchen, and for a second, I saw her again. My Marissa, age 9, bouncing in the front door after a school recital, ribbons flying. But it wasn't her anymore. Or maybe she'd been gone longer than I'd realized. She picked up her phone casually, not noticing the small tremor in my hand as I wiped up the spilled tea. "Everything okay?" she asked, all lightness and concern. I smiled. Of course, I said. She'd rehearsed her performance, so I began mine. That afternoon, I sat on the porch alone after they left. The wind had picked up, and the sky looked like it had forgotten how to be blue. I watched the maple trees bend under the pressure. That's how it felt inside me. Not broken, not yet, but bending. Far more than I ever should have had to. What kind of person sees their own mother as leverage? What kind of daughter plots your exit from the home you built without even having the decency to hide her contempt? I didn't cry. That part surprised me. I thought I would. I thought hearing those words would shatter me instantly. But all I felt was a terrible, quiet shame. Shame that I didn't see it sooner. That I'd mistaken manipulation for care. That I'd raised a daughter who saw me not as family, but as an asset. I thought about calling her out right then and there. Imagined it, the confrontation, the trembling voice, the wide eyes, as she realized she'd been caught. But something in me said no. Not yet, because I needed to understand the full scope of it first. And because maybe, just maybe, this was going to be the last performance I ever gave. You don't build a home like this with money alone. You build it with pieces of yourself. The first time I saw this house, it wasn't even a house yet, just a dusty lot off a sleepy side street with overgrown grass and a crooked for sale sign. My husband George had a good eye for structure. He saw the potential. I saw the light. I imagined morning coffee on the porch, bedtime stories in the hallway, our daughter's footsteps running from room to room. We bought it for less than we spent on our wedding, and we poured ourselves into it. George laid the floorboards by hand. I painted the nursery twice, first yellow, then soft green, when the ultrasound said girl. We grew tomatoes in the backyard, argued over cabinet colors, celebrated every first, and forgave every failure inside these walls. It wasn't just a house. It was a body we built together. And when he died too soon, too suddenly, it became my spine. Marissa was 16 when we lost him. I remember the way she curled up on the couch, knees pulled tight to her chest, mascara streaking her cheeks. I held her all night. I told her we'd be okay. I told her I was strong enough for both of us. And I meant it. I got a second job. I cut coupons. I went back to school at 48 so I could finally get out of admin work and into something that paid enough to keep the mortgage alive. I didn't date. I didn't want to. All my love went into her. I used to think she understood that. She stayed local for college, which I encouraged. Part of me, maybe a selfish part, just wanted her close. She majored in communications, minored in drama. She was always good at performance, but I never thought she'd use it on me. After graduation, she moved back in for a while. We turned the garage into a studio apartment for her. I paid for the insulation, the plumbing. She promised she'd pay me back. She didn't, but I let it go. I always let it go, because I believed love meant not keeping score. The first time she brought Daniel over, I liked him well enough. Polite, steady handshake, seemed to adore her. I didn't see what was underneath. I didn't see how he watched the house, his eyes tracking the crown, molding the fixtures, the bones of it. The way his compliments were always about how valuable this place must be now. I thought he was just making conversation. When they got married, I paid for the rehearsal dinner. Not because she asked, but because I wanted her to feel supported. After the ceremony, she hugged me tight and whispered, "I love you, Mom. I want you with me forever." Forever didn't last long. After their honeymoon, the conversation started shifting. Subtle at first. Have you ever thought about simplifying? Wouldn't it be nice to be closer to town? You shouldn't have to take care of a whole house by yourself at your age. At first, I thought they were just concerned. It was easy to believe. Easy to convince myself that their motives were pure. But there were little signs, little absences of warmth, like how she never asked about my work anymore, how Daniel would interrupt when I spoke at dinner, how my stories started being met with that gentle glazed-over smile, the kind you give someone you've already dismissed. I pushed the thoughts down. That's what I'd always done. I was raised on Midwest humility, the kind that teaches you to swallow suspicion and focus on gratitude. So I told myself I was lucky. Lucky to still have family around. Lucky they came every Sunday. But even the dinners started to feel rehearsed. She'd bring dessert in plastic containers and joke that I was too old school for DoorDash. He'd sit there, legs crossed, talking about renovations to their kitchen, their stocks, their next vacation. They never asked if I wanted to join them. They stopped pretending. And still, I cooked. I kept the porch swept. I kept the guest room made up just in case. I told myself it was just a phase. That one day she'd look at me and see the mother who built her foundation, not just the woman holding the keys to her next investment. I think the resentment started long before the voicemail. It just took that voice message to turn the dimmer all the way up to illuminate what had been building quietly for years. The day after I heard it, I opened the old cedar chest in my bedroom. The one I hadn't touched in years. It still smelled like lavender and thyme. Inside were all the things I'd kept: birth certificates, insurance policies, George's death certificate, the deed to the house. I sat on the floor, knees aching, pulling everything out one document at a time. It hit me then. I had done all of this, kept it all, maintained it, preserved the records, the rights, the legacy. Not for nostalgia, but because somewhere deep down I knew that one day I might have to defend myself. Not in court maybe, but in spirit. Because the people you raise sometimes turn into people you'd never let in your home if you met them today. I used to think forgiveness was automatic, that it came bundled with motherhood like some kind of warranty. Now I'm not so sure. That night, I reheated leftovers and ate alone. Her voice kept looping in my head. She still thinks I actually care about those Sunday dinners. I picked at my food, stomach turning. The sound of her voice didn't feel like a memory anymore. It felt like a weapon. After dinner, I lit a candle and sat at the kitchen table. I stared at the flame until my eyes blurred. And then I picked up the phone not to call her, but to look up estate lawyers. Not because I wanted to disown her, but because I had to protect myself from the version of her I never wanted to meet. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just change the way you see the other person, it rewrites every memory. Like watching a home movie where the faces are familiar but the voices are wrong. Too sweet, too rehearsed. The next Sunday, I set the table like I always did. Cloth napkins, the good silver, pork roast with rosemary just the way Marissa liked it. I even lit a taper candle. One, for ambiance, I told myself. But the truth was simpler. I needed something warm in that room that wasn't them. When they arrived, I heard Daniel's voice before the door even opened, laughing sharp, performative. Marissa followed close behind, air-kissing my cheek and handing me a bottle of wine I didn't ask for. "You've been working so hard lately, Mom," she said. "Thought you could use something nice." Her tone was syrupy. Sweet in the way medicine is sweet. I smiled and thanked her, then placed the bottle on the counter without looking at it. I noticed the way her eyes flicked toward it, tracking, measuring, like she was calculating how gracious I'd be. During dinner, the conversation flowed in its usual shape. Daniel talking about real estate trends, Marissa chiming in with little digs about how tough the market was, how lucky I was to have bought this house so early. "You're sitting on gold, Mom," she said, smiling over her fork. "Just saying." I nodded. I didn't rise. I didn't argue. I let her fill the silence, let her confuse my stillness for consent. And that's when I started seeing it everywhere. The way she only complimented the house now, not me. The way Daniel always offered to help clean up after dinner, but only ever picked up documents I'd left on the hallway table, utility bills, tax notices, anything with a number. He'd glance at them like they were puzzles. Solvable. Transferable. I remembered when Marissa used to bring me cookies she baked herself. Now she brought gluten-free options in branded boxes, tossing them on the counter like an afterthought. I remembered when she used to curl up beside me on the couch and ask how I was sleeping. Now she barely asked how I was. The warmth had thinned out so slowly that I hadn't noticed when it disappeared. It wasn't just what they said, it was how they didn't wait for my responses anymore. They'd fill in my silences with decisions already made. "You probably don't want to keep mowing the lawn, right? We could help you look at condos closer to town. A smaller place would be easier, cozier." The word cozy made me feel small. One night after they left, I wandered into the guest room they never stayed in. The bedding was still perfectly folded, the lavender sachet still in the pillowcase. It hadn't been touched in months. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around at the books on the shelf, the photo of the three of us from her college graduation. I whispered to the air, "You don't sleep here anymore." Not really. And I don't know who I was talking to her myself, or the daughter I remembered from before. That week, I started writing things down. Not to keep a record for anyone else, but for me. I needed proof that I wasn't imagining it, that the coldness wasn't just in my head. I jotted down the comments, the glances, the way her hand tightened around her wine glass when I mentioned staying in the house a few more years. I noticed how she never said home anymore. Just the house. I wrote that one down twice. By Thursday, I found myself sitting in the breakfast nook with all the curtains open. Letting the light in felt like an act of rebellion, like I needed the sun to see me, to witness me, to remind me that I was still real. I made a list of all the things in the house that were mine. Not legally, emotionally. The rosebush George planted after our first miscarriage. The carved banister we sanded together over a Memorial Day weekend. The squeaky floorboard in the upstairs hallway that always gave away teenage footsteps. Each thing on that list was a reason not to leave. And yet, I could feel them circling me, nicely, patiently, like predators dressed as caregivers. Marissa texted that afternoon. "Just thinking of you. Hope you're resting. Let me know if you want help looking at options this weekend." A heart emoji followed. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed a reply and deleted it, over and over. Everything I wrote felt either too small or too loud, so I left it unread and went out to water the garden instead. The soil was dry, cracked in some places. I knelt down by the azaleas, pressing my hand into the earth, grounding myself. My knees ached. My hands smelled like life. Life. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel fragile. I felt heavy, rooted, solid. It occurred to me then that maybe I didn't need to burn anything down. Maybe all I needed to do was stop giving them access to the foundation. Later that night, I opened the drawer in my desk where I kept all my important documents. I took out the house deed, held it in my hands, read my name clear as print can be. No cosigners, no joint account. Just me. My name. I pressed my thumb into the paper like I was sealing something. A vow, maybe. A boundary. Then I placed it back in the drawer and locked it. I slept well that night. Not because I had a plan yet, but because I had finally stopped lying to myself. They didn't love me the way I loved them. They never had. And now that I had said it just in the quiet theater of my own mind, I could finally begin to grieve. Not them. The illusion of them. I didn't tell anyone I was going to the lawyer. Not Marissa, not my sister, not even Evelyn from my book club who knows everything before I do. I just got in the car on a Wednesday morning, wrapped a scarf around my neck like armor, and drove down to the brick building with ivy on the side, the one I used, to pass 100 times without ever going in. I parked under the dogwood tree. The wind had started to strip the leaves, and little bursts of pink clung to the windshield like soft warnings. I sat in the car for 5 minutes before I could make myself go inside. There was something deeply humiliating about it, not because I didn't want to protect myself, but because I had raised a child I now needed protection from. And that truth sat heavy on my chest as I walked through the double glass doors and told the receptionist my name. The lawyer, a woman in her 40s named Allison, had the kind of face that made you feel both seen and slightly exposed. She didn't pity me. She didn't ask me if I was sure. She simply asked, "What do you want to make certain cannot happen?" I told her about the voicemail. I didn't cry. I watched her face for judgment. There wasn't any. I told her about the house, how it was in my name, only how I'd paid off the mortgage a decade ago, how my daughter had started dropping phrases like future planning and downsizing and ease of transition. I want to make sure, I said slowly, that I remain the only person who decides what happens to me, my house, and my body. Not just now. Later. When I'm tired. When I'm sick. Even when I'm gone. She nodded once. Then we start with your will. There was paperwork. So much of it. But I read every word. We set up a trust, irrevocable. No one could touch it without my written consent. We removed Marissa from the medical power of attorney. I appointed Evelyn instead, someone I trust to listen to me, not to a dollar sign. We locked the deed into a document that would trigger probate only under very specific terms. No loopholes, no fast sales, no sweet talking. Allison looked over her glasses at me and said, "You're being clear-eyed, not cruel." I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that. She handed me a thick envelope when we finished, my name printed neatly across the top. "Put it somewhere only you know," she said, "and tell someone you trust where that is." I didn't stop for lunch on the way home, didn't turn on the radio. I just drove in silence, windows cracked, the smell of cold pine drifting in like memory. I pulled into the driveway, my driveway, and looked at the house with new eyes. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was a line in the sand. I tucked the envelope in a place only I would think to look inside, the old cookie tin from George's first Christmas as a husband. The one we used to fill with peanut brittle and hide from Marissa so she wouldn't eat it all in one sitting. I sat on the floor after I closed the lid, my back against the cabinet, and I let the silence stretch. This wasn't revenge, it was protection. And for the first time in weeks, the shame lifted. The next Sunday, I didn't cook. I ordered a rotisserie chicken and put it on a serving platter. I used paper napkins. When Marissa arrived and raised an eyebrow, I smiled and said, "Thought I'd give myself a little rest." She laughed, called me modern, and poured herself a glass of wine like everything was normal. But I wasn't playing normal anymore. I watched her carefully that night. Not suspiciously, just clearly, the way you watch a stranger at your door. She asked if I'd considered those places we talked about. I asked her what she would do if her mother didn't want to leave the only home she'd ever built. She blinked, caught off guard, and then smiled too widely. "I'd support her, obviously." I nodded. That was the only lie she told me out loud. The others were still playing in the background, looped in that voicemail stitched into the weeks of manipulation I'd finally named. As they left, Daniel lingered a moment at the door. "If you ever want help figuring out the market value," he said casually, "I could run some comps. No pressure. Just to know your options." I tilted my head slightly. "Thank you," I said. "But I'm not curious." He smiled like I'd misunderstood him. I hadn't. That night, I took a long bath and poured myself a whiskey, just one finger neat. I hadn't had whiskey in years. George used to sip it on winter nights and make up silly poems while the snow fell. I sat by the window, watching the stars emerge behind the trees, and I felt something settle inside me. They still thought I was the woman who needed permission. They didn't realize I'd stopped asking. I started noticing things after that. Not about them, about me. How much lighter I felt in my own house. How often I laughed when I was alone. How I took up space in a way I hadn't in years. I stopped apologizing when I asked for things at restaurants. I started saying no to things I didn't want, like helping with their dog while they went to Tahoe. And I noticed how little they noticed. Because they weren't really looking at me. They were still looking at the asset. But I wasn't theirs anymore. Maybe I never was. Maybe in some backwards way, that voicemail saved me. Not from them, but from the version of myself who still believed love meant loyalty, even when it was laced with strategy. I locked the front door that night, not as a habit, but as a statement. Let them knock. They don't have a key. I used to believe that power looked like shouting, like raised voices, doors slammed, tears flung across a room. But that Sunday, as I stood at the stove stirring gravy, I realized real power was quiet. It was the kind of stillness that unsettled the room because it meant you were no longer playing the part they gave you. I had set the table like always, though this time I only used 3 place settings, not 4. A quiet decision. Marissa asked, "No salad tonight." "No salad?" I said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Something going around we should know about." I smiled, handed him the bowl of potatoes. "Just simplifying." We sat. They talked. I listened. The performance was still happening, but now I was in the audience, not the cast. I watched the way Marissa complimented the curtains I'd had for 10 years. The way she called my pork roast amazing, even though I hadn't added a single spice. The way she kept glancing around the room, almost like she was taking inventory. I kept my voice soft, my hands steady. But in my purse, beneath the table, sat the thick envelope from Allison's office. My will, my trust, the new power of attorney, all finalized and notarized. It was with me not because I needed it that day, but because I wanted to know it was near. I wanted to feel the weight of my own agency at my side. Marissa asked me how work was. A rare question. I told her it was fine, then took a long sip of water and let the silence stretch. That was new for me, letting silence do the talking. Daniel brought up real estate again. Market's still crazy out there. You could list and be gone in 30 days. Gone where, I asked, turning to him with a neutral expression. He hesitated. Well, you know, wherever you want. Something modern, lower maintenance. I like this house, I said. He smiled like I was a child clinging to a blanket. Marissa leaned in. Mom, it's not that we don't respect your attachment. We just want what's best for you. Best for me. I'd been told that before. At the dentist, when they pulled a tooth I wasn't ready to lose. By the mortgage broker who offered a balloon loan we couldn't afford. Even George, before his heart gave out, had used those words when he refused to go to the hospital. I'm doing what's best. But this time, I tasted the phrase like spoiled milk. Still, I nodded. Thank you, I said. It means a lot. I don't know what expression flickered across my face, but Marissa tilted her head, studying me. Like I'd changed something in the script and she was scrambling to catch up. After dessert, store-bought pie, underbaked and too sweet, I asked them to stay for tea. It wasn't something I usually did, and that must have thrown her off. Sure, she said slowly. Is everything okay? Of course, I replied, placing 3 cups on the table. Why wouldn't it be? She didn't answer. I took my time, brought out the good china, the delicate white cups with faded blue roses that had belonged to George's mother. I poured slowly, the scent of Earl Grey curling around us like memory. Then I sat, not at the end of the table where I always did, but at the head. It was a small shift, almost imperceptible. Marissa noticed. She looked at the chair, then at me. Switching things up, she asked. I think I like the view from here, I said. And that was it. That was the confrontation. No shouting, no tears, no accusations. Just a woman taking her rightful seat at her own table. They left shortly after that. Daniel said something about traffic, but I could tell they were uncomfortable. Not in the way people are when they're guilty, but in the way they are when they realize their plan might not go the way they'd rehearsed. Marissa hugged me, too tightly. Her breath was fast. "Love you, Mom." I didn't answer. I just held her, then let go, before she did. As their car backed out of the driveway, I stayed by the window. Not hiding, not watching. Just standing there, with my hands folded, feeling the quiet all around me and inside me. It didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. Later that night, I walked through the house room by room. I touched the banister, the bookshelves, the window panes George had installed himself. I whispered each room's name like a prayer. This is mine. This is mine. This is mine. I ended in the garden. The moon was high. The air smelled like mint and soil. I sat on the stone bench under the arbor and looked up at the stars. No grand epiphany came. Just a breath. Just stillness. I thought of the envelope in my purse, the way it had rested there during dinner, like a secret between me and the future. And I thought about how many years I had given away pieces of myself in exchange for closeness that was never real. But not anymore. I didn't need her to confess. I didn't need him to apologize. I had chosen myself. Quietly. Completely. They would keep coming, I knew that. The performance wasn't over for them. They didn't know the final act had already passed. But next Sunday, I wouldn't be cooking. I'd be away. Somewhere with trees and water. Somewhere they wouldn't think to look. Because love given freely is beautiful. But love used as currency is a contract I will never sign again. I didn't leave a note. Not because I wanted to worry her, but because I finally owed myself a day with no explanations. The Sunday after the silent confrontation, I packed a small overnight bag, turned off my phone, and drove up to the lake cabin I used to rent with George in the early years of our marriage. I hadn't been back since he died. The key still worked. The place hadn't changed. Inside it smelled like cedar and thyme. The furniture was old but familiar. There were still burn marks on the countertop from when he tried to flambe something on our anniversary. The window near the bed stuck when you tried to open it just like it always had. I didn't bring much, just a sweater, a book I knew I wouldn't read, and the cookie tin with the legal documents inside. I placed it gently on the nightstand beside the old lamp and just looked at it for a while. It reminded me of who I was before I spent so much of myself trying to be a mother worth keeping. It's funny the stories we tell ourselves when we're raising children. We tell ourselves they'll grow into people who reflect our best parts, that the sacrifices will come back to us as gratitude, that if we just love hard enough, purely enough, selflessly enough, they'll remember. But children don't remember everything, and some of them remember what's useful, what can be leveraged. Some of them inherit your smile and your sense of humor, and others inherit your ability to calculate who's holding the door open too long and what they might owe for it. That day at the cabin, I stopped grieving the daughter I raised, because I realized she wasn't missing. She had simply evolved into someone who saw me as an asset, into someone who confused proximity with love, politeness with care, inheritance with intimacy. That hurt. There's no soft way to say it, but knowing the truth let me finally stand beside it without shrinking. I sat on the back porch as the sun began to slide behind the trees, painting everything in gold. I drank tea from a chipped mug that still had a faded duck printed on the side. I held it with both hands like something sacred. There were no voices around me, no forced laughter, no questions laced with expectations. Just the sound of the wind through pines and the distant call of geese overhead. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't knock on the door and announce itself. It seeps in when you stop chasing the version of love you thought you deserved and start tending to the quiet that remains after disappointment has cleared the room. I stayed at the cabin until Monday afternoon. I didn't check my messages until I was halfway home. There were 3 from Marissa. 1 text, 2 voicemails. The text read, "Mom, are you okay? You didn't say you were going anywhere." The first voicemail was syrupy concern. "Hey, just wanted to check in. You're probably out on a walk or something. Just give me a call when you get this." The second voicemail left 4 hours later was different. "Okay, not to overreact, but it's kind of weird that you're not answering. I mean, we were supposed to talk about those places you said you were considering. I hope you didn't forget about that appointment I made with the realtor. Anyway, call me. No, I love you. No, hope you're okay. Just concern about the schedule."
The plan. The exit strategy. I deleted the second voicemail without listening to it all the way through. When I got home, I walked into my kitchen and inhaled deeply. The house smelled like lavender and lemon and memory. The floors creaked beneath me. The light filtered in through the east window the same way it had every morning for 30 years. I took the envelope out of the tin and placed it in the fireproof box in my bedroom closet. I locked it with a small, firm click. Then I opened the blinds in every room of the house, and I let the day come in. That night I called Evelyn. We didn't talk about Marissa. We talked about garden bulbs, about the book neither of us had finished, about how grief ages us but also simplifies us. Before we hung up, she said, "You sound whole." I hadn't expected that word, but it fit. Marissa didn't come by that week. Neither did Daniel. I received a short email on Thursday with a link to a senior living facility and a smiling cartoon of a palm tree. It read, "Just keeping you in the loop. They have good reviews." I didn't respond. Instead, I printed the email and slipped it into a new file folder labeled Leverage Attempts. I keep it in the desk drawer next to the will, not out of bitterness, but because I now understand what it means to protect yourself from the people who should have done it for you. The next weekend, I planted tulip bulbs along the back fence. My knees complained. My hands shook a little, but I did it myself. 1 scoop at a time, earth, bulb, cover, repeat. Every motion felt like a declaration. I'm still here. I'm still mine. You don't get to rewrite me. I no longer pretend that love from family is automatic. I no longer confuse access with closeness. And I no longer mistake good manners for good intentions. I sleep with my windows open now. Not because I'm naive, but because I'm no longer afraid of the dark. And that more than anything feels like freedom. Marissa started calling more after that. Every few days, my phone would light up with her name like a clock I hadn't set. Always mid-morning, always chirpy. Her voice was careful, a little higher than usual, what I used to call her interview tone. "Hi, Mom, just checking in," or, "Hey, have you had a chance to look at that place I emailed you?" She always made it sound casual, like she wasn't still running the script in her head. I answered the first 2 calls, kept my responses neutral, let her fill the silence. But by the third one, I didn't pick up. And when she texted, "Everything okay?" I waited until the next day to write back, "I'm fine. Just enjoying my space." That was all. No emojis. No warmth for warmth's sake. I wasn't being cold. I was just done pretending. She replied instantly, "Miss you."
"Let's do dinner this week." I stared at the screen for a while. Not because I didn't know how to answer, but because I finally understood something that had been fluttering in the background all along. She didn't miss me. She missed control. Still, I said yes. I wanted to see her not out of hope, but out of study. We met at a bistro downtown, the kind she liked: reclaimed wood, Edison bulbs, plates that cost more because they were small. She arrived late, her lipstick perfect, her smile just a little too fixed. "Mom," she said, pulling me into a hug I didn't return fully. "You look rested." I thanked her and sat across from her at the window. The afternoon sun hit her cheek just right, and for a moment I remembered braiding that same hair on the first day of 2nd grade. She ordered wine for both of us before I had a chance to speak. So she said brightly, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about staying in the house." I said nothing. She kept going, pushing her salad around with her fork. "I just want you to be safe, Mom. You know that, right? I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm trying to help." There it was. The line. The rehearsed absolution. She needed me to believe that her version of help was the only rational one, that my resistance was confusion, that my clarity was fear. I took a slow sip of water, then met her eyes. "I'm not moving," I said gently. "Not now. Not ever. Not unless I choose to." She blinked. "Okay, but I've handled everything already. The legal side. My care decisions. The house." I let that hang in the air. She tried to laugh. "What do you mean, handled? Like a will?" I smiled without showing my teeth. "More than that." Her face faltered. For a flicker of a second, something slipped confusion or worry. She pushed her hair behind her ear, the way she always did when she couldn't find her footing. You didn't talk to me first. I didn't need to." Her fork froze midair. "You're my daughter, Marissa. But that doesn't mean you get to make decisions for me. That doesn't mean I owe you access, or assets, or explanation." She laughed again, sharp this time, defensive. "Wow. Okay. This is dramatic." "No," I said, setting my napkin down. "This is me being clear." The silence after that was the real conversation. She changed the subject, started talking about her job, her recent promotion, a new gym she and Daniel had joined. Her words came out fast rehearsed, as if nothing had happened, as if we hadn't just shifted the axis between us. I let her talk. I nodded. I didn't offer details about my life. I didn't soften the edges. At the end of the meal, she offered to pay. I let her. She kissed my cheek in the parking lot and said, "Love you." I said, "You take care." And I drove home with the windows down, the wind cool on my skin, like a second kind of truth. A few days later, I received a letter. Handwritten, sloppy pen strokes. "Dear Mom, I'm sorry if I've come off pushy. I didn't mean to upset you. I really do just want what's best. I know you probably don't believe that right now, but it's true. We should talk more. We shouldn't let this shift us. You've always been my anchor. I want that back. Love, Marissa." I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as the printed email, the one labeled leverage attempts, not because it was malicious, but because it was manipulative. Because what she wanted back was not me. It was my compliance. And the truth is, the version of me she anchored herself to, always available, always agreeable, always giving, no longer exists. The version she raised has been quietly replaced by someone else. Someone who still loves but doesn't chase. Someone who sees clearly and no longer plays along. A few weeks passed. She stopped calling as much. The texts became less frequent. I think she knew. Or maybe she didn't, but she felt it. The closing of a door she thought she'd propped open forever. I spent more time in the garden. More time on walks. I repainted the guest room in a soft sea glass color and ordered new curtains, not because I expected anyone to visit, but because I wanted it to reflect me. Just me. No one else's opinion. No one else's plan. I made a playlist of songs I used to love before George passed. Ones I hadn't let myself play in years because they made me feel too much. I listened to them on full volume while I scrubbed baseboards and rearranged bookshelves. Grief doesn't go away, but it shifts, and sometimes it leaves enough room for music again. One night, I danced alone in the living room. No shoes, no audience. Just me and a Leonard Cohen song, the lights low, the dog asleep at my feet. I didn't feel young. I didn't feel powerful. I felt true, and that was more than enough. The next escalation came in an envelope. I'd been weeding the garden that morning, gloves damp with soil, when I saw it in the mailbox. A plain white envelope with my name printed in bold type across the front. No return address, but the sender was obvious. I opened it on the porch, sitting on the old bench George had refinished the year before he died. Inside, a glossy brochure from a luxury senior living facility 2 towns over. Folded into the middle was a note in Marissa's handwriting. Mom, just a thought. You deserve comfort, community, and peace. We can talk more over dinner next week. Love you. No question mark. No opening. Just a decision dressed as concern. I laughed. It startled me, honestly, the sound of it low and bitter, slipping out like steam from a cracked pipe. Because I'd finally learned how to read her fluency in euphemism. Comfort meant surveillance. Community meant curated company-scheduled meals and monitored decisions. And peace meant distance from me, from guilt, from accountability. I didn't throw it away. I placed it in the folder with the others. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and took out my own envelope, the one with the notarized trust documents and revised will, and I made a copy of the front page. Just the title and the notarization date. Then I wrote a note of my own. Marissa, thank you for your concern. I've already planned for my comfort, my care, and my peace. You won't need to. No emotion, no signature, just clarity. I slid it into a manila envelope with the copied page and mailed it to her house the next morning. Certified with tracking. 3 days passed before I got her reply. A voicemail, of course. Her voice light, but clipped. Hi, I got your note. Kind of a lot to unpack. I guess I thought we could make those decisions together. I didn't realize you were already planning. I mean, I guess that's your right, obviously. It just feels kind of cold. Anyway, call me if you want. I didn't call. Instead, I walked to the edge of the backyard where the tulips were just starting to push up through the dirt. Their little green fingers reaching. Relentless. There was a time when her saying it felt cold would have pierced me. A time when I would have cried or backpedaled or rewritten my boundaries in softer language to make her feel comfortable about crossing them. But not anymore. I had learned something in those silent spaces she called cold. I had learned that boundaries are only cruel to people who benefit from their absence. The following week, Daniel called. He rarely called directly, so when I saw his name flash across the screen, I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before answering. His voice was smooth. Too smooth. Hey, Maureen, just checking in. Everything all right? I knew the call wasn't about care. It was a test. A temperature check. He wanted to see if I was rattled. If I'd cracked. I'm doing fine, I said, but I'm not available to discuss estate planning or real estate anymore. That subject's closed. He cleared his throat. That's fair. Of course. Just trying to stay involved, you know I don't need involvement. I need distance. He paused, probably not expecting the directness. Well, if you change your mind, I won't. I hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a while after that, hands flat on the counter, breathing in the silence. They had tried sweetness, then guilt, now pressure, each one more transparent than the last. The next Sunday, I didn't host dinner. I didn't call to cancel. I simply didn't set the table. I made soup for myself, played a jazz record on the old player, and curled up on the couch with a book. When the doorbell rang around 5:30, I didn't answer it. Let them knock. They don't live here. I got a text at 5:47. Marissa. We're outside. Are you okay? I muted the phone and turned the page of my book. At 6:12, a follow-up. Marissa. We're going to head out. call me. I didn't. Instead, I made a list of everything I had done in the past 3 months that had made me feel like myself again. Painted the guest room, repotted the dying orchid, went to the movies alone, took the long way home on purpose, donated 3 boxes of clothes, slept with the window open and didn't panic. Told the truth without a tremble. At the bottom of the list I wrote, withheld access to my life without explanation. I underlined that one, because that was the hardest thing of all. Letting go of the need to be understood. Letting silence be enough. Later that week, I had tea with Evelyn at her place. She poured with those careful hands of hers, always deliberate, always warm. She asked me how things were going. I told her the truth. They still think they're circling a version of me that doesn't exist anymore. Evelyn chuckled. That version packed up and moved into the front row of her own life. I smiled. We sipped in silence for a while. Then she said something I won't forget. You know what your daughter sees when she looks at you now? What an unpredictable asset. I blinked. What do you mean? She thought she had you forecasted. Like a stock. Stable. Familiar. Obedient. But now you've gone off script. You're no longer profitable. And she doesn't know how to value you unless you give her something. It hit me like a second voicemail. Not cruel, just accurate. They didn't know how to value me outside of the transaction. But I did, and that was enough. That night I sat down with a blank piece of paper. Not a will, not a plan, just space. And I started writing what I wanted next. Not in response to them, not in fear, but in hope. A list of desires. Small ones, honest ones. A trip to the coast. A new paint color for the kitchen. Maybe a dog. A dinner with someone who doesn't see me as a strategy. A year without performance. A decade, if I'm lucky. The page filled slowly. But every word was mine. The next time she showed up, she didn't knock. She used the side gate like she used to when she was a teenager sneaking in past curfew and stood in the backyard like it still belonged to her. I watched her from the kitchen window. She was wearing a soft sweater, no makeup, her hair tied back loosely like she wanted to appear undone. Vulnerable. Innocent. But I could see the effort in every line of her body. Nothing about her was unintentional anymore. I didn't go outside. After a few minutes, she walked up to the sliding door and gave a little wave. I opened it halfway. Hey, she said softly. I didn't want to call. I figured showing up meant more. I said nothing. I miss you, Mom. I waited. She sighed. Okay, I deserve that. I get it. I've been pushy, controlling. Her voice caught. I've been scared too. You're getting older, and things feel fragile. And I don't want something to happen and then realize we never talked about anything that mattered. I raised an eyebrow. We've talked about a lot of things. Most of them just didn't go your way. She blinked as if I'd struck her. Then came the tears. I watched them slide down her cheeks, slow and shiny, landing silently on her collarbone. I'd seen those tears before on stages and fights, in moments where she needed to press pause on accountability. But this time, I didn't reach for her. I didn't offer a tissue. She stepped forward. I don't want to fight. I just want to feel close to you again. I let the silence breathe. Let her fidget in it. Then stop trying to manage me, I said. She shook her head. That's not what I'm doing. It's exactly what you're doing. You've spent months trying to maneuver me into what's easiest for you and Daniel. You made my autonomy feel like a negotiation. And now you're here crying because you can't control the outcome. That's not fair. It's not meant to be fair. It's meant to be true. She turned away for a moment, wiping her cheek. I don't know how to fix this. I nodded slowly. Maybe it's not yours to fix. Maybe what's broken isn't the distance between us, but the fantasy that you were entitled to what I spent my life building. Her mouth opened, then closed. I stepped back from the door. I'm not locking you out, I said. But I'm not leaving it open either. She looked at me like she didn't know who I was. That was good. That meant she was finally seeing me clearly. Before she left, she placed something on the patio table, a small envelope. I waited until she was out of sight before I opened it. Inside, a photo. The two of us. I was holding her as a toddler, both of us laughing in a blur of summer light. On the back she'd written, I do love you, even if I'm bad at it. I stood there with the photo in my hand for a long time, and I felt it, what I hadn't wanted to admit. There was still love in her, but it wasn't the kind I could rely on. It was love with conditions, love that flinched at boundaries, love that took inventory of how much was left to gain, and I couldn't live under those terms anymore. That night, I pulled out my journal and wrote down what I'd never dared say out loud. I raised her with everything I had. But I will not be held hostage by my own motherhood. I closed the journal and slid it back onto the shelf behind the cookbooks no one ever asked me for. The next day, I went to the library and checked out a memoir by a woman who left her family behind. Not because she hated them, but because she chose herself. I read it in 3 sittings. In the margins, I scribbled, choosing peace is not abandonment. It's oxygen. A few days later, Evelyn came by for tea. She noticed the photo of Marissa and me wasn't on the mantel anymore. I told her I'd moved it to a drawer. That doesn't mean I don't love her, I said. It just means I don't need to be reminded of a time when I mistook dependency for closeness. She nodded and handed me another biscuit. We talked about the tulips, about how stubborn they were this year, about how spring sometimes comes in fits and starts like grief, like healing. Marissa didn't call that week. The silence felt good. It wasn't tense. It wasn't strategic. It was just space. And in that space, I started planning a trip. Not to get away from her, but to step deeper into myself. I wanted to see the redwoods, to stand beneath something older than all our drama. Something that didn't care about power struggles or misunderstood texts. Something rooted. I didn't tell anyone about the trip. I booked a cabin near the forest. 1 bedroom. Fireplace. No cell reception. As I packed, I placed the legal envelope in my suitcase, not because I expected anything to happen, but because carrying it made me feel like I wasn't just protecting what I owned. I was protecting who I'd become. I left a note for Evelyn, just in case. It read, if anything happens, know this, I left on my own terms. I made peace with the noise, and I walked into quiet with both eyes open. I signed it M, just M, because even now, after all the titles, the roles, the years, I was still learning how to belong fully to myself. And that, more than any legacy I could leave behind, felt like something worth claiming. The redwoods were taller than I remembered. I hadn't seen them since George and I passed through on our way to Mendocino in '89. Back then, I'd taken a single photograph him standing beside a massive trunk arms, outstretched, grinning like a boy. I still have that photo in an old shoebox somewhere, but now I carry it in my head. This time, I came alone. The cabin was tucked into a bend in the woods, with moss growing along the roof shingles and a single wooden rocking chair on the porch. Inside it was modest: a bed, a wood stove, a table that rocked ever so slightly when you leaned too hard to one side. No television, no cell signal, just wind and bird song and the groan of ancient trees settling into themselves. That first night, I lit a fire and boiled water on the stove for tea. The kettle hissed and spat louder than I expected in the quiet. I sat wrapped in a wool throw, cradling my mug, watching the flames lean and flicker like they had something to confess. I'd come here to be alone, not to escape, not to punish, but to settle something that had been churning inside me ever since that voicemail shattered the glass I'd been living behind. It was strange, the peace that arrived in the absence of performance. There was no one to smile for, no one to reassure, no one to monitor the softness of my voice or the shape of my posture. I wasn't a mother here, or a homeowner, or a strategist in a battle I never wanted to fight. I was just a woman in the woods finally taking up the space she'd earned. On the second day, I took a long walk beneath the canopy. The path was damp, needle-lined, and dappled with light that filtered in like cathedral windows. My boots sank into the earth with each step, and I felt myself sinking too in a good way. Deeper into gravity, into groundedness. I stopped beside one of the larger trees and pressed my palm against its bark. The grooves were deep furrowed like age lines. I imagined how long it had stood there, how many storms it had outlived. And I thought, this is what endurance looks like. Quiet, immovable, unconcerned with being liked. That evening, I sat outside as the sun dipped behind the hills. I ate soup from a ceramic bowl and let the silence rest beside me like an old friend. Then I pulled out the legal envelope, creased now the paper worn from being carried, and laid it on the table. I opened it slowly, reviewing each page like I had the first time, the trust, the updated will, the healthcare directive. Every sentence was a line I had drawn in the sand, not because I feared my daughter, but because I no longer feared solitude. I added one more page to the back, a handwritten note dated and initialed. My legacy is mine to decide. It is not defined by what I give, but by what I refuse to surrender. I tucked it back inside and resealed the envelope. That night, I slept better than I had in years. No dreams, no spinning, just breath, just quiet. When I returned home 2 days later, the voicemail box was full. 7 missed calls, 2 texts from Daniel. 1 email with a subject line that read, "Urgent financial conversation." I didn't open it. Instead, I placed the envelope back into the fireproof box in my closet. I smoothed the top and stood for a moment with my hand resting gently against the cool metal lid. They could knock, they could ask, they could push. But I had already walked through fire and come out on the other side. A few weeks passed. They didn't stop trying. Another dinner invitation. This one worded like a truce. Let's just catch up, no agendas, but I'd learned how to recognize a smile with teeth behind it. I declined politely. I spent that week repainting the kitchen. Seafoam green, a soft, bold color. George wouldn't have liked it, he always preferred neutrals, but this wasn't about what he would have picked. It was about choosing something that made me exhale when I walked in. I bought a new chair for the reading nook, one of those wide, low-seated ones you can pull your legs into. And I started reading memoirs again, not about perfect families, but about complicated women who stopped apologizing. Evelyn came by one afternoon, bringing scones and a little stone she'd found on a hiking trail. "It reminded me of you," she said. I held it in my hand. It was heavy for its size, warmed by her pocket. Solid, a quiet kind of strong. I smiled. "I'll keep it by the window." She looked around the newly painted kitchen. "This feels like a woman who's not going anywhere." "I'm not," I said. "Not until I say so." We didn't talk about Marissa. Some truths are better honored in silence. That night, I placed the stone on the windowsill above the sink. The light hit it just right, casting a small shadow that looked like a mountain. And I thought, even small things can stand tall when they stop trying to disappear. A week later, I got one last message from Marissa. No voicemail, just a text. I guess this is where we are now. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. But I can't keep guessing what you need. I read it twice, then again, and then I deleted it. Not out of cruelty, not out of finality, but because I no longer needed her to understand what I needed. I had already given it to myself. I wrote the letter on a Tuesday. Not for Marissa, not really, and not because I thought she'd ever read it. I wrote it because the ache had shifted. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was dull, persistent, like a phantom limb. Not grief for who she was, but for the version of me I had to leave behind to survive her. The woman who always made peace, who smoothed everything down, who kept the door cracked just in case love decided to walk back through it. I wrote the letter by hand, sitting at the little desk in the guest room, the one she never stayed in anymore. I lit a candle, opened the window just a bit, and let the air come in without asking permission. To my daughter. There's so much I could say, but I won't pretend we haven't already said it all in some form in glances and omissions in half-hearted holidays. I'm not angry anymore. I was. But that's gone now. Anger takes too much from me, and you've already taken enough. I want you to know this isn't a punishment. It's not a strategy. This silence between us, it isn't some weapon I'm wielding. It's a boundary I've built from everything I ignored. When I heard that voicemail, I didn't just hear your voice. I heard your intent. And worse, I heard your ease. You didn't sound conflicted. You sounded prepared. Like someone who had already folded the map and decided which road to take with or without my consent. I raised you to speak your mind, and now I'm asking myself whether I taught you too well or not well enough. Because what I didn't teach you, maybe, is that people are not assets. That trust is not a leverage point. That kindness does not mean permission. You didn't just want the house. You wanted control over the exit plan. You wanted me to hand you the keys and thank you for rearranging my life. And I almost did. That's the part that still haunts me. I almost smiled through it. I almost made it easy for you. Because I still loved you like a mother, and sometimes love is the most dangerous disguise of all. But I didn't. Because I remembered something I'd forgotten for too long. I am not just your mother. I am a woman. A whole, complex, breathing woman with a life that began before you and that, God willing, will continue long after you stop trying to script its end. I will always love you. That part doesn't change. But I am no longer responsible for proving it to you. I don't know if we'll speak again. I don't know if one day you'll see what this was and what it wasn't. But this silence between us, it's mine. It's not a pause. It's a decision. Love. Mom. I folded the page carefully, pressed it between the covers of an old novel, and slid it onto the shelf. Not hidden, just quiet. Waiting for no one. The next morning, I went outside and pruned the rose bushes. It was early, and the dew still clung to the leaves. My gloves got soaked, and the thorns nicked my wrists, but I didn't mind. That's the thing about tending to your own garden. You learn which cuts are necessary. Afterward, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees, tea in hand, and listened to the neighborhood stir awake. A dog barked somewhere down the block. A child called out. A screen door creaked. Life went on. So did I. Later that day, Evelyn and I went into town for the craft fair. She bought a ceramic mug with a chipped handle and said it was perfect. I bought a wind chime that sounded like rain. We passed a booth selling hand-stitched signs. One of them read, "Not everyone who comes to your door is meant to enter." I didn't buy it. I didn't need to. I'd already lived it. That night, I made a simple dinner lentil soup and a slice of rye toast. I lit a candle and let the silence sit beside me like a well-fed guest. I thought about Marissa, not with anger, not even sadness, just as a fact of my life. A chapter. A ripple that had stilled. She hadn't reached out again, and that was fine. Some doors don't need to slam shut, they just stay quietly closed. Before bed, I opened the drawer and touched the corner of the envelope one last time. I thought about everything inside, all the paperwork, all the planning, all the proof that I had not just survived this chapter, but owned it. I smiled just a little. Not for anyone, not for show, just because it was true. I used to imagine reconciliation as a moment of warmth. She would come back to me, arms, open eyes, soft with understanding. We'd cry maybe, say the hard things, then breathe easier knowing love had triumphed over pride. But that version of the story belonged to the woman I used to be, the one who always waited at the window. The one who mistook silence for safety and compromise for closeness. That woman is gone now. Not in anger, just shed, like skin that no longer fits. A few weeks ago, I ran into Daniel at the farmer's market. He was buying artisan honey of all things. I almost walked past him, pretending not to notice, but he spotted me first. "Maureen," he said, cautious, smiling like nothing had happened. I nodded. "Daniel." He fumbled with his words. "We haven't seen you." "Marissa's been wondering, has she—" He offered a half laugh. "She misses you." "We both do." I tilted my head the way I do when I'm letting someone finish something I no longer plan to carry. "You should let her know she's allowed to miss me without trying to manage me." He looked confused, or maybe just caught. I didn't wait for a reply. I thanked the vendor for the tomatoes and walked away. I didn't turn around. That night, I came home, made a plate of roasted vegetables, and ate dinner by the window. The sky was blushing pink over the trees, and for a moment, I thought about that voicemail again. Not the words, but the sound of her voice. How confident it was. How transactional. She hadn't stumbled. She hadn't hesitated. That was the part I'd stopped trying to forgive. Not the plot. The poise. That certainty she had that I'd simply comply. That I'd mistake her manipulation for maternal concern. That I'd hand over my legacy like a polite signature. And maybe I would have, if I hadn't heard her say it out loud. But I did. And it woke me. The voicemail was never meant for me, but it arrived like a truth I hadn't dared name, that love without respect is just entitlement in disguise. And now I carry that truth like a lantern. In the months that followed, I took better care of myself. I went to the dentist. I started walking in the mornings before the world stirred. I unsubscribed from every email that made me feel small. I replaced the worn curtains in the living room and finally threw out the chipped china that had belonged to George's aunt, not because it was broken, but because I never liked it. I made space, and the space became mine. One evening, Evelyn and I sat on the porch with glasses of white wine, listening to wind chimes and cicadas. "Have you heard from her?" she asked. "Not in a while. Do you want to—" I thought about it. Not the polite answer, but the honest one. "No." Evelyn nodded and took a slow sip. "You seem lighter." I feel owned, I said. She laughed. That's not how people usually mean it. No, I said. But I mean it in the best way. For once, I belong to myself. That night, I wrote in my journal one last time about her. Not a letter, not a memory, just one sentence. She chose control. I chose clarity. I didn't need to add more. The next morning, I opened the back door, stepped barefoot into the garden, and watched the tulips finally bloom. Not all at once, not dramatically, just quietly, each one lifting its head as if to say, "See, we did it anyway." I spent the day rearranging books, folding linens, polishing the windows until they gleamed. I thought about how much of life I'd spent waiting for someone to notice me doing it all, and how good it felt now to do it only for myself. Around dusk, I walked out to the edge of the yard and sat on the old bench under the maple tree. It was cool again, the season shifting back towards stillness. I closed my eyes and listened. Not for a car, not for a knock, just for the rustle of wind and leaves. Somewhere in that quiet, I found myself again. Not the mother, not the widow, not the woman who almost signed her name away. Just me. And that was enough. Some treasures had been recovered. Others more valuable still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.